doesn't get fixed. I mean, once in hatred, there's almost no reconciling it. It just plays itself out. But that words like white supremacist, I think, are much more accurate about saying where the issue of prejudice is. It's about a sense of kind of, I'm attaching to this sense of who I am, and it is heightened beyond this other group that I'm opposed to outgroup in relation to my in-group. And so words like, maybe Islamist supremacist would be a redirection. And I think that the word, the phobia part is out of the history of fear as a motivation for these kinds of relations. But it's not as accurate because it's more about how is someone relating to his or her own group, and I think there's more that's possible to do that than has been done.
I'm sort of a methodological question, I guess, to the psychologists here. I'm a person who studies history, and history of communism, history of the left, and when I look at sort of communist societies, you can't really know what people were thinking, right? Because there were no polling, no free public press, there was no freedom of expression in certain periods. And even when people were writing diaries, they were narrating them through a certain prescribed narrative. And I wonder just how exactly we can gauge, the levels of hatred, of anti-Semitism. Because, yeah, of course, Iranian leadership, okay, they say it, but, how do we really, or statistically know what's going on the other side?
We know some.
And I wonder how exactly also we can influence if we don't know.
Somebody's doing a study on which mosques in the West Bank were controlled by Hamas. If you know Hamas is controlling
The
the mosque.
Syrian Authority you can know, but otherwise.
We have the Pew Global Attitudes Study, which looked at Muslim attitudes towards Jews compared to other groups across about 5 or 6 Muslim countries. And they found there that negative attitudes towards Jews never dropped below 60%, and that was Turkey. And that if you looked at it compared in Europe, negative attitudes toward Jews on the exact same measure never got above 20%. So that's one way of quantifying it. And another way of looking at it is if you can content analyze the media and look for what type of views are presented and whether they're answered. And if you find that the views are presented regularly and that responding views are not presented, that would give you another type of measure.
I have a slightly more hopeful
Yeah.
idea of proportions, using attachment theory. And pretty consistently in attachment theory, researchers have found that about between 60 and 70% of infants or young children are classified as securely attached to their caregiver. What that means is essentially an optimal balance between their kind of connection with their caregiver and their own capacity to explore, to have autonomy, develop their autonomy as a young child. And consistently also what's been found is that the insecure attachments, they're split into what they call ambivalent, anxious attachment or an avoidant attachment. And those are between 15 and 20% on either end. Those are more associated with pathology. And the reason I think that framework, it might be an important one, is because it's a framework that basically looks at the secure attachment as essentially an optimal balance position, and that majority of children have that growing up, whereas the extremes are really laying out separation and attachment dynamics, which are the basic components of how we affiliate with large groups, the importance of having an affiliation with a large group while maintaining our autonomy as an individual, and an optimal balance in that kind of a position. And so we could, if it, this is for researchers here, I don't have the ability to do that, but to see if those positions of the classifications of attachment play out at the large group level, then you would say that a smaller percentage would be perhaps ongoingly prejudiced. You know, everyone has got that potential, you know, when what I was talking about in the paper in terms of the boundary between the group and the person gets narrowed based on, let's say, context. Even those people in that optimal balance move temporarily over to the large group, but then they move back, you know, because they've got that capacity. So I think that's a framework that for researchers might be helpful in assessing levels of prejudice.
But you know, the very high percentage of traumatized individuals do develop insecure attachment and disorganized attachment, so it's going to really make it very difficult to differentiate between those who've been abused and maybe victims or traumatized versus those who you're proposing may hold prejudice views, and that because there was a disruption in their capacity to attach and to be part of, you know, the human organization.
Yes.
So I think that it would be, I think it would be very hard to differentiate between them because there's a kind of a final pathway of disruption and the ability to form a connection. And I think they one from the other.
Yeah, I guess just in terms of if there's a real trauma in someone's life that's identifiable, then
They have to explore this.
I like the answer though that, you know, there are direct measures. I mean, the problem is, I was being glib before, but you know, the problem is that there's some prejudices and some, depending on the social context, you're going to get people underreporting, right? But, you know, with this kind of really overt ideological anti-Semitism that's accepted within the society, you know, you are able, it is visible because it isn't hidden. But I think in other circumstances, you know, it's maybe lurking more in the background, or there's more political correctness in responding,
Right.
that sort of thing, and we don't always know. I mean, we don't, you know.
I would think that in Europe,
Right.
you know, people are already conditioned to answer questions in a certain way, but they will not come out as
Right.
anti-Semitic.
Right.
You know, in a certain, you know, they know, or even just, you know, political correctness. People know sort of what they're supposed to say or not supposed to say about
Right.
not just
But
Jews,
at the
minorities.
current epicenter of the problem, I think, you know, you're right. I mean, you can look at these attitudes are very overt, and that, you know, that, and there are polling data on them that I think probably are pretty accurate.
If you have a 41-part series based on the protocols of the elders of Zion that's shown on Egyptian television, and then you have debates in the newspaper about whether the Jews are entirely guilty of this or partially guilty of this, but nobody says innocent of this, then that tells me that it's fairly widespread. Imagine if ABC and NBC started having programs saying, you know, blacks are inferior, or, you know, let's reestablish slavery, and people said, hey, good entertainment. And there was nothing in any of the entertainment pages about, you know, hey, maybe this is a, you know, racist. That would tell you something about America.
I want to respond to Anat's question. Basically, when we talk about general processes, we don't need to look for, I mean, it's close to humanities that we look at specific phenomena, and in psychology we look at general processes. Like, so if we study in lab that there is connection between association of Jews and apes, okay? So these are the two are connected, and then it, like the association between the two affect hostility. Then in any context that this association is activated, this will cause to hostility. And then we don't need to have the whole picture, because we studied and we looked at it in lab, and then we try to generalize it and to see if it works also in reality. And so we don't have to, you know, we can't get the whole picture in order to create intervention. We can create small specific interventions, and we can't, because we can never capture the whole picture, because there are so many aspects. But if we empirically study a specific vignette, and then we can design intervention and specifically capture that, I think it's a benefit. So that's the way I see.
Yeah, I wanted to say to Peter that maybe we can use the IDT. Do you know what IDT is? Is that it's a measure of implicit prejudice, and it's usually used in the context of anti-black
stereotypes or prejudice, and I think it can be used in the
it could be used.
yes, in the context of, because it was never used, I think, as far as I know, in the context of anti-Semitism, and maybe the connection between, yes, Jew and even positive
Right,
attributes.
confidence associations are not
Yes,
sort of
yes,
positive, right?
and we might
Yeah.
test whether it predicts, for example, anti-Israeli. Because for me, what is a little troubling is the how to disentangle anti-Israeli views that might be. I mean, I don't think that any criticism on Israel is illegitimate, because I also have criticism to Israel, but how to disentangle this from anti-Semitism and using the anti-Semitism method.
So the footnote to that, I'll plug something I did with Ed Kaplan, who's a mathematical genius here at the School of Management. And we did a paper, actually with the ADL, that we took ADL material, which they never used, and they did a sample survey of 5,000 people, 500 people in 10 European countries. And we measured for classical notions of anti-Semitism, like how Jews are unfair in business practices and they keep to themselves. And then we had a series of questions asking making statements like the IDF purposely shoot children, or the Israelis are poisoning water. Very extreme view. Israel's an apartheid state. Very extreme views of Israel. And what we found was that it's off the charts in terms of modeling. So the 10 European countries have relatively low levels of classical forms of anti-Semitism. And then among the population that are Israel bashers, they're not anti-Zionists. We're not saying anti-Zionism because you could be anti-nationalist or anti-Zionist for a whole array of issues, but Israel bashers. Within this population, they're 13 times more likely among the Israel bashers to be classically anti-Semitic. So it's off the charts. If something was 13 times more likely to be causing cancer in a supermarket, they would take it off the shelf immediately. So it's very strong. So in our article, I think it's the only one that we kind of do this in this manner, with that statistics and that's really good. So it's in the Journal of Conflict Resolution.
I do think getting back to interventions, I think I appreciate the point that if you're going to have bang for your buck, it's not going to be, it's really this Middle Eastern genocidal anti-Semitism, and the problem is access. And there really almost has to be top-down negotiated political solutions, to filter that down, because it's really,
There's also two sides to this problem. On the one hand, there's the radical Islam and genocidal anti-Semitism, and a social movement which is real in many Islamic countries. On the other hand, there's this acquiescence of the left in Western Europe and North America.
right.
Particularly one
That might be more attackable.
Yeah, that could be an area to research more easily. Because if this rhetoric is true, why would liberals in the West who are diametrically opposed to everything that reactionary radical Islam stands for in terms of democracy, citizenship, women's rights, gay rights, why is there this turning a blind eye when it comes to Israel and the Jewish question?
There are few answers to that, I guess. One would be, in my view, a culturalizing view. And this is part of a certain culture that is a different culture, and you have to accept that.
Who are we to
Churches are
criticize?
still very active in Europe, just as the mosques are in the Arab countries. The Catholic churches are still teaching that we have killed the press. I have met people who've never seen a Jew but hate them. We had somebody who said, "Oh, well, gee, you're Jewish, where are your horns?" I mean, I'm serious, adults asking these kind of questions. So the stereotype is extremely strong.
In regard to the education of Muslims, there was a comment made during, was it Stevan who made this comment about Saudi Arabia and sending out, trying to tone down? Is anyone else?
I never heard of that, but I was in UNESCO 2-3 weeks ago in Paris, and they had this Project Aladdin, which is from the Shoah Foundation, and it's being supported by the Saudis and other, the Organization of Islamic Countries are involved, 56 countries. There are 3,000 people in UNESCO, and they launched this project to fight the denial of the Holocaust. And the president of Senegal, Muslim, stood up and said there's a war against the Jews today, and there's a war against the memory of the Holocaust, and a war against the memory of the Holocaust is a war against the Jews. The war against the Jews is a war against humanity. 3,000 people from 56 Muslim countries were in the United Nations and applauded him. So there is good work going on. So there are signs of hope. I don't know about what he spoke about in Saudi Arabia, but we're supporting this. So there are good things happening.
Yeah, I just saw in one of the articles today that they actually citing scripts from the education system in Saudi Arabia that is completely inflammatory and it's coming from their education system. So it needs to go a little faster, you know, in terms
It's a
of.
little hard to accept, isn't it?
Excuse me?
A little hard to accept. that
Yeah, it's here in my, I just got it today.
The United States has been specifically lobbying with the Saudis for years about trying to get them to change their educational materials. And then actually that type of lobbying is one form of intervention that might work. In other words, when there's a lull and when America's got good relations with an Arab country for a while and when Israel has some relatively good relations, then one of the places where you can make progress is on trying to reverse some of this negative education. And that could be a mid-level kind of intervention which has some hope for the future, but which doesn't require dealing with the Iranian government or resolving the Arab-Israeli conflict first.
Also in Geneva, and maybe Josh can talk to it too, but I met with the head of the Organization of Islamic Countries there, and there are many Islamic countries that are very worried about the rise of Iran and Shiite Islam, and they're I think very open to dealing with Holocaust now and anti-Semitism as long as people deal with Islamophobia. They're very open to Western and even Israeli and Jewish contact. So there's a lot of breaks. I don't know if Josh, if you...
Yeah, I had the same experience. There were a number of Palestinians in particular upset about what's going on, the rise of powers around, not all Palestinians obviously, but the ones that I spoke to were at a conference largely about human rights, certainly other Arab countries too.
Well, I was going to make the comment when somebody pointed out that Iran is not likely to use their bomb on Israel. That doesn't mean they're not likely to use it on somebody else. And it may well be that they get to develop it by saying we're going to use it on Israel, we're going to use it on Israel. But when they're actually involved in a conflict, they're going to be more likely to use it against a country that doesn't have nuclear weapons. And they're also likely to have their influence augmented in international affairs by having it without using it. So that the question of what, and I think they may well find a way to justify using it even though Muslims are killed. But I think they don't have to in order for it to be dangerous. And it may well be that when people are doing realpolitik calculations in some of the Arab countries, they're considering that they are probably more likely to be actual victims in Israel.
Okay, so I think we'll wrap up. We're supposed to leave the room around 6:30 anyway. So everybody, thank you very much. And please, I'll be in touch with the scholars about the papers. And if anybody has ideas, suggestions, to work with us at YIISA, for those who are not already, we're open to creative and innovative ideas, and we're inclusive, so please feel free to contact us and speak with us. And thank you all very much for your participation.